Okay, so picking up where we left off for the older adult presentation with Jen's case, I'm going to start applying my first theory to the industry versus inferiority stage. And that first theory is the biopsychosocial approach. So I'm just going to go through the factors that we know about Jen during each of the different parts of this approach during this life stage. So, starting with biological factors, we don't really know a lot about biological factors that Jen was facing during this stage. She didn't have a lot to report in terms of this. So she reported no major health issues during her childhood. She reported that her family generally had enough to eat and that she was receiving adequate medical care when needed. She was involved with some physical activities, stating that she did ice skating for a while and that she also liked to go fishing. She reported that the only substance use in her family was cigarette smoking by both of her parents. Jen said she never smoked, even though she was around it her whole childhood. And both of her parents did actually later die from smoking related illnesses. Um, she faced sexual abuse that was previously discussed during this time from external forces, which she could have potentially used treatment for. Jen reports that after this happened, she did have some frequent nightmares and trouble sleeping. So those were kind of some biological effects on her of those events. Um, Next, psychological factors. Jen reported that during this life stage, she started to have low self-esteem. She believes that this was a result of the sexual assault she experienced and then her mother focusing all of her attention on her brother, which made her feel, as she would state, like no one cared about her. Jen reported that her coping skill was going fishing or spending time doing auto work with her dad when he was around and home from work. Jen reported feeling a connection to the sciences during this stage, specifically because this was the only subject she did not struggle with in school. She wanted to be a nurse or a science teacher, and she reportedly struggled in school because she mixed up letters and numbers and struggled with reading and math. Um, she was later in life diagnosed with dyslexia, much later in her life. However, she probably could have benefited from a learning evaluation. Um, However, her family moved so frequently that no one ever got to that point. It was also kind of not something that happened as frequently during the time period that she was growing up. Um, and then in terms of social factors, Jen described her relationships during this stage as being minimal, and the ones that did exist were tense. She reported that within her family, her mother was focused almost exclusively on her brother, keeping him out of trouble. She said that her mother was the den leader for his Cub Scout pack, but would frequently not even come to her events. She also reported that this affected her relationship with her mother and her brother. And she said prior to this shift, her and her brother had been best friends, and then she started to feel negatively towards him, and they also became more aggressive, causing them to fight frequently. Jen said her father was usually away on work, and her other siblings were already older and left the house. Jen also reported that she did not have many friends because her family moved a lot. She referred to the people that she did spend time with during this stage as acquaintances because she would not be around them for long and would always lose touch with them after they moved. So, just some, from the biopsychosocial approach, looking at diversity and oppression, demographically speaking, Jen identifies as and claims that she has always identified as Caucasian, female, straight. She reported that for most of her life prior to starting to use alcohol, and especially during this specific stage of her life that we're focusing on, she would have identified her socioeconomic status as middle class. When asked about times where she felt oppressed, Jen stated that when she was sexually assaulted at a very young age, it made her feel powerless and made her feel like people were taking advantage of her because she was a girl. Jen reported that after that happened, she feared doing things that were considered feminine for a while because she felt like males around her frequently targeted this. Another area where she expressed some oppression was with her education, whether it was because the teachers did not know any better or during this time period about her disability, or because she moved around so frequently that no one had time to notice. She felt like she was always behind in class and would never be at the same level as her peers. So the next theory that I wanted to apply to this life stage was Bronfenbrenner's ecological theory. So this is broken down into the four different systems, and I chose this approach because it focuses on many levels of an individual's environment and also their perceptions of that environment. Um, the Rogers text talks about how a major point of this theory is how the individual perceives things, which makes it more individualized. What might be one person's motivator for change might be another person's feeling of inferiority. So, just starting with her microsystem, some things that exist in Jen's microsystem at this stage were her parents, her siblings, her classmates, her teachers, doctors, etc. These are all things that she interacted with and perceived a specific way. Jen perceived her interaction with her family as unsupportive because she did not receive the same treatment as her brother. Jen attended several different schools during this life stage, and she perceived these interactions as mostly unhelpful because of her struggles with learning disability. However, Jen also perceived some positive things about school as it helped her develop her love for science. In Jen's exosystem, some social settings in Jen's life during this stage that affected her were her parents' jobs, books that she read, and neighbors around her. So, for example, Jen's assaults happened at the hands of acquaintances these are people who were neighbors. Another example could be books and other reading materials that she used to learn more about science. So some of the mesosystems that I noticed from Jen's life during this stage, which these are the interactions between her microsystem and her exosystem. Jen's father's job interacted a lot with her family because they had to move around for work, and his work also frequently removed him from the family. Jen's perceptions of this were not very positive because she did not have her dad around as much and felt that their living situation was very unstable. Jen's interactions in the science classes and reading about science helped her perceive school as more enjoyable because she had something that she felt like she was good at. And then for Jen's macro system, some macro systems that affected Jen during this stage were industry and societal views. Jen's family's moves were based on where there was a need for her father's work. Therefore, industrial needs played a large role in Jen's family, peer, school dynamics. One of the system failures that we can observe is the failure for educators to diagnose Jen's learning disability. However, this may not have been a failure solely on educators that Jen interacted with. During this stage of her life, very little was actually known about learning disabilities. According to the Learning Disability Association of America, the term learning disability was not even introduced until 1963 when Jen was approximately 7 years old. And educational developments like this would have been macro system level changes that could have affected Jen in a positive way. All right, so I know I'm over time a little bit already, so I'm just going to go through this real quick. Some limitations of the two theories that I applied to this life stage for Jen. Starting with biopsychosocial, according to Rogers, this theory can be viewed as too simple, as the three components do not cover all of the complex events of an individual's life. The text also discusses how it's a problem focused and does not address strengths, and in some cases even seems to highlight failures. So I find that this approach can be very good for gathering and separating information from clients, but I can see how it leaves out a lot, and that's why I chose ecological theory as my other theory, because it focuses on many parts of the individual's sphere and also their perceptions of events that affect them. And then for ecological theory, some limitations. According to Rogers, again, one of the major critiques of ecological theory is that it is so broad, and that if two social workers applied it, it could be applied differently by each person. I thought this was interesting because I wanted to do some more research about this outside of the textbook, and I noticed that some people put different things into different categories. I also noticed that some people apply this theory and discuss another level, which is the chronosystem. and that focuses on environmental changes, which I learned from Simply Psychology. And then the other kind of limitation for this theory is that it also discusses it mostly leaves out biological factors, so it doesn't really include those. And so I thought this theory would be good to use next to biopsychosocial, because biopsychosocial does include those biological factors, whereas this one does not. And then these are my references. So thank you for watching my presentation, and I'm sorry that it is a little bit longer than it's supposed to be.